To be or not to bop? That is the question. What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of To Be or Not to Bop. All right, so today we're going to get into one of the most important jazz trumpet soloists throughout the history of the music. I'm talking about none other than the incredible Blue Mitchell. Now, usually I give you guys the little album shot, but I realized this is the only Blue Mitchell record I own. And we're not going to go over this record today, but we will eventually. This is a great Blue Mitchell recording entitled Bring It Home to Me. One of my favorites, of course. When I first started checking out Blue Mitchell, I was in my CD era. So I have many Blue Mitchell CDs. And look at this, our first on-camera CD booklet show off. Today we're going to do sort of a retrospective, sort of a best of the great Blue Mitchell. Go through a few of his recordings. As you can see here, this is Blue Soul CD cover, and this is from another record of his entitled, or CD of his entitled Boss Horn. So, Blue Mitchell, personally for me as a trumpet player, obviously one of my favorites, but not necessarily a trumpet player that I transcribed a lot of their work. Just a few of his things. I definitely would take some lines and phrases from his playing, but I think I learned the most from Blue Mitchell by just listening to him and not necessarily what he was playing. I'm obviously listening to what he's playing, but I think the biggest takeaway is how he plays, his treatment of harmony, melody, and rhythm. And Blue Mitchell is synonymous with being one of the most soulful, funkiest trumpet players. All right, so he's certainly a master technician, beautiful sound, great phrasing, incredible articulation. I really, that's one of the things I really love about his playing. It is staccato, but not too staccato. Certainly reminiscent of Clifford Brown. And he is absolutely in that trumpet tree we talked about. You know, obviously starting with the great Louis Armstrong, so many in between there, from Louis Armstrong to Roy Eldridge to Dizzy Gillespie, Fats Navarro, Clifford Brown, Kenny Dorham, Donald Byrd, all names we've discussed on this show. And Blue Mitchell is certainly, without question, right in that lineage. So as you know, I always love to find some footage or some video interviews of the artists that we're focusing on so we can really see them and hear their voice and hear what they had to say. But I couldn't really find too many I couldn't find any actually, Blue Mitchell interviews. Obviously, you know, when I do this show, I'm also learning so much from the viewers, you guys out there dropping beautiful stories and factual information in the comments. So if you do know of any Blue Mitchell interviews, please let me know, drop it in the comments. So a few of the things I did find, I found a great interview by Orrin Keepnews, record producer for Riverside Records. He recorded Blue Mitchell quite extensively. This is a very interesting interview. Let's check this out.
Blue Mitchell, there was a session set up so that I could hear Blue. I heard this guy. He sounded great. Blue had been just very briefly on the scene, had then gone off and took care of some narcotics problems that he had. He's one of those not unique, but pretty reasonably rare people who took care of their own problems. Cannonball's first album is one for which Miles had contributed a tune. Specifically, Nardis was written as a present to Cannonball. The first...
All right, I love this story. This is super hip. Check it out.
The first night never happened. Blue was extremely nervous, and here he was, first time in a long time recording in New York. His luggage was lost on his trip up from Florida, so that he was at the studio in a gaudy, flowered Hawaiian shirt that Cannonball had lent him. And, as sometimes happened at record dates of mine, Miles Davis showed up to stand in the control room and glare at people in the studio. So here is
Classic Miles.
Blue Mitchell.
Already loving this story so much so far. They're talking about the legendary Cannonball Adderley, also from Florida. Blue Mitchell was a Floridian, so that's where the connection begins there.
People in the studio. So here is Blue Mitchell, nervous out of his skull anyhow, attempting to play a Miles Davis composition with Miles there. So we gave up on that night and went back in the next night.
Yeah, so what the composition that he's speaking of there is one we all know by the name of Nardis. Let's hear a little bit of that. Now, could you imagine this? This is a young Blue Mitchell just coming to New York, I think only his second record date, and none other than the legendary Miles Davis is in the recording studio checking him out. And you know Miles had a vibe, very vibey individual. Let's listen to a little bit of that solo before we go on. All right, so that's Nardis. We know that one. That's from a record called Portrait of Cannonball. Let's hear a little bit of Blue now playing over this song. Now, one thing Oren Kick News mentioned is that on a Riverside record date, they didn't have rehearsals. But one thing that they did do was they recorded 2 days. So they would record on one day and then record on the other day. So their sessions were a bit more stretched out. But you can hear from this recording, you should definitely go and check this out on your own as well. They were definitely reading this tune. And on the record date, it says that there were 5 takes of it. So a young Blue Mitchell just lost his luggage coming from Florida. And now he's got to go record in the studio, which is obviously incredible and exciting. But none other than the great Miles Davis is hanging out in the studio while he's recording. All right, so let's hear a little bit of the solo. Now, if you know a thing or two about blues playing, he is not apprehensive. One of the things I love the most about his playing is there's just a certain flow. He has incredible forward motion at all times in his playing. But this is an interesting circumstance here. He's in the studio playing new music, and one of his idols, I'm sure, is just hanging out, checking him out. So let's hear a little bit more of how he navigated this situation. So still beautiful lines, great tones. I talked about his articulation, that very crisp, in the pocket articulation. So we still have all of those elements there, but you can definitely tell he's kind of figuring it out as he goes, all right? So let's listen to a little bit more of that. Still so beautiful, so melodic. You know, that's a crazy situation, but he dealt with it. And it's always just so beautiful to hear these stories of these people that artistically, I'll speak for myself, I've always artistically held Blue Mitchell very high on a pedestal for all of the obvious reasons. Incredible, soulful, beautiful flow, but it's also nice to see the progression. You know, they all started somewhere, and being nervous and in the studio and playing is certainly something I've gone through as an artist. But it's cool to hear them do what they do before you hear them at their peaks. All right, Blue Mitchell on Nardis. All right, so in this episode, like I said, we're gonna do sort of a retrospective, best of, top 5, top 4 Blue Mitchell solos, so we can really cover a range of his career and his style and his approach. We're gonna start off by listening to a record, or a CD, called Blue Soul. Actually, let's hear Oren Kepnews talk a little bit about this record date before we play some of it.
Blue Soul was the third album that I did with Blue, and it was a matter of it wasn't a matter of getting out of the original format to any real extent. I mean, Blue was the kind of guy that you did small group blowing albums with. Eventually, Blue was the guy that we did our first Strings and Horns album. Blue, of course, spent many years as the trumpet player in the Horace Silver Quintet.
All right, so I'm gonna stop there because we're definitely gonna talk about Blue with Horace Silver. I think that is one of the most important band leader, trumpet player connections in the history of the music. But let's jump ahead to Blue Soul. All right, so the first track we're gonna listen to from Blue Soul is The Way You Look Tonight. Classic standard, we all know this one. All right, so there we have, this is To Be or Not to Bop, so you know we're gonna have some Philly Joe on this show, a whole lot. That was none other than the great Philly Joe Jones there with the little drum intro kicking things off. And in addition to Philly Joe Jones, we have Sam Jones on the bass, no relation, you should know that. All right, so let's jump ahead a little bit. Let's check out the melody, hear how Blue treats this melody. This is one of my favorite solos of his. All right, you're gonna hear all these things I talk about in terms of flow and style and things of that nature. Here we go. All right, yeah, so there we go. The Way You Look Tonight, In the Pocket. So that was Wynton Kelly on the piano. And one thing I love about this particular track is the way Wynton Kelly plays on it. So you have Blue Mitchell playing in a quartet setting. So this record is actually a sextet record, but there are a few tracks where they break down the band. You're hearing just Blue in the front line, but one of the beautiful things about the way Wynton Kelly plays on this, it's almost like he has a horn player right next to him as he's playing. That's something even for myself when I'm playing in a quartet setting. I want the pianist to get in there with me, play chords, but also some melody too. All right, so let's check out some more. Bam. Yep. Beautiful. All right, so yeah, like I said before, Sam Jones on the bass, Wynton Kelly on the piano, and So In the Pocket. So in this particular track, what I love is that we're hearing truly the bebop side of Blue Mitchell. Blue Mitchell's absolutely a bebopper and great modern jazz soloist. But a lot of times when we think about his style and we categorize his style, we think about how soulful he is and how funky his playing is. But he can play some changes with the best of them. Just incredible lines, like I talked about, that forward movement thing. All right, let's hear a little more. Bang, bang. Yeah. Yeah. All right, and we hear those lines that Wynton Kelly's playing behind him. All right, let's hear this last A. Last section of the melody. Yeah, Wynton Kelly. All right, so before we get into this solo, one of the things I love about this track as well is when you listen to this record as a whole, there's a lot of beautiful arrangements, but this one is just sort of a blowing tune. You know, they're just loose and not reading and just playing a tune, so you can really hear them get into their element on it. All right, let's get into this solo. Bang, 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 bang. Yeah. So Blue Mitchell, you know, that quarter note feel is strong. We talk about that throughout the history of the music, from Louis Armstrong to Miles Davis, and now we're hearing that strong quarter note feel from the great Blue Mitchell as well. You know, if we think back to that Nardis story, this is his third album now, so he's a little bit more seasoned, top of his game, confident, strong. You know, Miles was at that first session of his, but now he's playing basically with Miles Davis's rhythm section. You know, Wynton Kelly on the piano, Philly Joe Jones, but only exception Sam Jones on the bass. So there's the Cannonball connection. Yeah. Beautiful phrase, long lines. So the same principles I talk about with Donald Byrd and Fats Navarro, and I think Blue is absolutely a master of this as well. It's just long phrases, long eighth note phrases that are high in intensity, rhythmically just on point. We talk about that articulation, super sharp, and that flow, that forward movement. Blue most definitely has that in his solos, and that's something that you'll hear as you check out his style more and more. Yeah, let's hear a little bit more of that. A little Clifford Brown line. Yeah, so that's definitely a little phrase that Clifford would play from time to time. Yeah, Blue's in there. Blue is right there with all of those greats. All right, let's jump ahead a little bit more. Yeah, let's hear how he closes out this solo a little bit. So again, with the great Blue Mitchell, it's all about melody, pocket, beautiful phrasing, beautiful tone. He's just a lyricist in what he does. So that was a beautiful last phrase. Let's jump ahead a little bit and hear Blue trading with Philly Joe Jones. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. All right, let's hear how they end this. Simple. So like I talked about with that track, as you listen on your own to the record Blue Soul, you hear that it's a very organized, structured session. A lot of beautiful arrangements by Benny Golson, Jimmy Heath on that one. But that track, they were just getting loose on it. So that was The Way You Look Tonight. Let's go on to the next track. All right, so this next track is sort of a rare one. This is from the Horace Silver record entitled Blowing the Blues Away. Now, I believe on the original LP of this track isn't on this. So this song was added later as a bonus cut when it was put on CD. So this is a standard, definitely a lesser known standard. I don't think I've ever heard anyone else play it. It's called How Did It Happen? But this is one of my favorite Blue Mitchell solos without question. All right, so let's hear a little bit, and now we're gonna get into as well about Blue's time with Horace Silver, which is very important. All right, let's just hear a little bit of the beginning of this track. Already, that classic Horace Silver, beautiful front line melodies, deep pocket, there in the groove. Blue with Horace Silver, to me, the period that he's with Horace, this is his prime years, all right? And he really is in my opinion, the voice of the trumpet in Horace's band. The signature sound is Blue Mitchell, without a doubt. I think he was perfectly suited for this band. He was a perfect match with Horace's style. Let's hear a little bit more of that in context. All right, so Blue Mitchell, one of the reasons he was a perfect fit in this band is because you have to play bebop in Horace's band. You got to play funky. You got to be able to read, blend in an ensemble. And Blue really checked all those boxes. Beautiful melody. This is a Blue Mitchell episode, so we're going to get a bit more into his solo. I ain't going to play too much of the recording other than his solo for now, but let's get into Blue's solo on this one. Another thing that's great about this solo, and as I studied his style, so I definitely think Blue Mitchell loved playing in G major. Arguably, to me, his greatest solo was on the song I Wish I Knew. That's a solo that many jazz trumpet players talk about. It's a perfect solo. I'm not gonna play it for you on this episode, but that solo's in G major, and so is this one. And if you compare and contrast, when you go and listen to that recording and then listen to him playing on this one, you can hear that he's just very fluent in that key. All right, let's hear the trumpet solo. All right, so you can hear it. The Blue is right there on the changes. That drive I talked about, that forward motion. And also, in terms of his feel when he plays, Blue to me is kind of one of the rare ones from this particular school of playing, like with Kenny Dorham and Donald Byrd and Clifford Brown. I think Blue plays a little bit on top of the beat, but not too much because it's super swinging. So he's either on or kind of pushing it a little bit. You can see if you can hear what I'm talking about. Right there. Boom, 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 boom. Just right on top of that tempo. All right? He never really is behind. All right, so there you have it. Blue Mitchell and Horace's band bebopping, playing those changes on top of things. All right. So in this period of Blue Mitchell and Horace Silver, Blue's in Horace's band for 6 years. And Horace would say it was certainly like a family atmosphere. And the way Horace talks about Blue, you can tell it was definitely probably his favorite trumpet player that he had in his band. And they made all of these incredible recordings together. So Finger Poppin', Blowing the Blues Away, which we just heard, Horoscope, so many great ones. Let's listen to another recording of Blue with Horace Silver. And this to me shows you the funky side and that beautiful connection, because when you played with Horace, like I said before, you had to be able to play bebop and you had to be able to play funky. You know, I always say to people, whenever there's talk about, well, what would have been your dream band to play in? And for me, it would have been playing in Horace's band. To me, that was the greatest band of that era, personally. I just love that mix, that same thing of playing a lot of bebop and playing funky. All right, so let's jump ahead to this track, Filthy McNasty.
Filthy McNasty.
All right, so Horace Silver, like so many of his contemporaries of the bebop era, full composition. So he's always going to write a beautiful intro, interludes, shout choruses. A complete composer of the highest order is Horace Silver. And already what you're going to hear in this song is the influences of gospel, R&B and soul music. All right, let's jump ahead a little bit. Yeah, super groovy. I remember talking to Randy Brecker once. He said when you played in Horace's band, you could not play too long. Don't play too many choruses. He didn't want you to get into that type of thing. He wanted people's head bopping and booty shaking in the seats. All right, this is from Randy Brecker himself. He said this about playing with the great Horace Silver. So that's something that when you hear this music, you can tell that it was of a top priority. Let's listen a little more. You can't help like shake your head when you hear this. So let's hear how Blue deals with this style. This is, when it comes to playing funky and playing bebop at the same time, this is the guy. All right, let's check him out. Smooth, beautiful first chorus opening statement. And you hear those little riffs in the back. And this is the 60s, so that was definitely a groove that was synonymous with that time. All right, let's jump ahead a little bit more. There you go. All right. So that same energy. Let's jump ahead a little bit more, hear a little more of these phrases. You know, when I listen to Blue, it's very reminiscent for me of Roy Hargrove. I think they are kindred spirits in the way they played and their approach to the music. We all know that the great Roy Hargrove loved to bop, but he also had his bands like RH Factor to play funky and soul music. So Blue, along with guys like Donald Byrd, is the first in that archetype of bebopper who plays soul music. All right, so that's where that lineage starts. Let's hear a little bit more. And you talk about playing the blues. If you want to check out a trumpet player who can really play the blues, you check out Blue Mitchell. Yeah, band was so swinging. So of course we have Blue Mitchell on the trumpet, Horace Silver on the piano, but this is that legendary, I think the greatest Horace Silver band. Roy Brooks on the drums, Gene Taylor on the bass, sometimes Louis Hayes on the drums as well, and Junior Cook on the tenor saxophone. Let's hear a little more. Super funky. Let's hear a little more. All right. And this, you know, he doesn't go too high on this one. He goes up to high D. I think that's the highest note on this one. Blue Mitchell, funky, super soulful, filthy McNasty. So go and check that one out. All right, so this last track we're going to check out is called Tones for Jones Bones, and it's from the album Boss Horn. Now we're jumping ahead a little bit chronologically, so this recording is from 1967, from a very important period in Blue's career. Now we're seeing him as sort of an elder statesman, so to speak, a band leader, and he's in this role now of bringing up young musicians in his band the way Nat Adderley and Cannonball did for him. And that's one fact to go back on. The reason he got the gig with Horace Silver was because Horace actually wanted Nat Adderley in the band. But obviously the great Nat Adderley, we talked about him in one of our previous episodes. He went on to play in his brother's band, and the rest is history. So much great music in that period. But had he not played with his brother Cannonball, he would have been playing with Horace Silver. But that opened the door for Nat to recommend Blue Mitchell to be a part of that band, and then they were going to create so much history. So now in this particular track that we're going to hear in Tones for Jones Bones, this is a Chick Corea composition. And so this is a young Chick Corea, and this is really his first big gig. Chick Corea's first big gig is with Blue Mitchell, all right? And so Blue, being a great mentor, he obviously recognizes the undeniable talent of Chick Corea, and he features him in his band, and he plays one of his compositions. So that's what we're gonna hear right now, Tones for Jones Bones. All right, so already a very different vibe on this track. Sort of a semi-big band recording on this one. So we have Blue Mitchell, we have Jerry Dodgen, the incredible Jerry Dodgen. Junior Cook is still on this one. We have Pepper Adams. We've definitely talked about a lot of these musicians on the show before. Julian Priester on the trombone, Mickey Roker on the drums, Gene Taylor on the bass. We also have Cedar Walton on piano for a few of these tracks. Not on this particular track, but he's definitely on a few of the tracks from this record as well. And this Chick Corea composition is arranged by none other than the incredible Duke Pearson, which we talk about in episode 1. So already just beautiful, beautiful composition. That Blue Mitchell tone. You know, I'd obviously never heard him live, but it sounds like he didn't play super loud, just super controlled, beautiful vibrato. He has probably one of the fastest vibratos on trumpet. So harmonically, this is a departure from what we heard from the earlier tracks, like The Way You Look Tonight, obviously being a standard with a bebop treatment on that standard. And we heard How Did It Happen, same sort of thing, groovy standard, certainly a bop-rooted piece. Filthy McNasty, gospel, R&B, soul vibes. But this one is a more post-bop, modern type of composition, obviously with Chick being the composer. That is definitely one of the reasons why. But yeah, let's hear Blue in this context. It's very interesting. Yeah. All right. So like we said, you know, this is a different context, more modern, post-bop. But as you're going to hear when we get into the solo, Blue is still Blue. All the things that made him great as a bebopper, funky trumpet player, he adapts his style with this particular way of playing, or this particular type of composition. So, in that first chorus, you just hear, it's almost like he's just playing the melody, but his solo is calm, melodic, very tied to that melody. The expression, the sound that he puts behind the phrases is something to certainly take note of. Let's hear a little bit more. You know, this is an approach, like usually when you hear a trumpet player playing this way, that's like, you'll say that's very Miles-esque, because he's not playing a lot of notes, just playing the right notes, the best notes, and the phrasing is simplistic, but super hip and beautiful. Let's hear a little more. Oof, beautiful. All just so much melody in there in what he's doing. And you can hear that chemistry between Blue and Chick Corea. There's this, the way he's playing behind him, it's a beautiful blend. That's a grown-up phrase right there. Like, it almost sounds like he composed that, and he composed it on the spot, but it's just brilliant melody. Let's hear a little more. Now, there's the Chick Corea solo on this is unbelievable. You guys can go check that out on your own, all right? Blue Mitchell on tones for Jones Bones. So there you have it, the great Blue Mitchell. We heard him as a youngster on one of his first recording dates, and we see a gradual evolution. We heard him on Blue Soul, where you hear the fiery young trumpet player, definitely with the energy to prove that he is here and he's on the scene and he's ready. Then we heard him really, in my opinion, at the peak of his powers with Horace Silver, one of the great collaborations of the music, band leader, trumpet player. They were a perfect fit with the rooted bebop knowledge style mixed with the soul and funk element. Blues definitely one of the most funkiest. And then we heard him a little bit as an elder statesman and as a band leader with younger musicians and approaching new styles, post-bop styles, you know, recognizing the great talent of Chick Corea. So Blue, he remained consistent across multiple contexts. He always serves the music first, and he had a complete style, beautiful tone, time, taste. This is the brilliance of Blue Mitchell. Like I said before, I haven't transcribed a lot of Blue Mitchell, but I've learned so much from just listening to how he plays and his approach to the music. So we hope you enjoyed that. Thank you so much for watching this episode of To Be or Not to Bop. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Peace. To be or not to bop? That is the question.